women need to have the same opportunities to shape digital technologies.
I am turning to all women active and interested in digitalization.
And position young women and girls as not only consumers but also producers within the digital sector.
The industry is ready to embrace us all, and when we get into the industry, we will shape our own future.
Hello and welcome to Women Leading Digital, a podcast by GIZ where we discuss digital transformation and technology with leading voices from around the world. My name is Martina Karapa-Rusheva and I work with the Data Economy Initiative at GIZ. In this episode, we will have a closer look at different approaches to actually implementing women-centered data economy projects.
It's a journey. You don't necessarily need to be a guru or very technical in technology. The spectrum is big.
Raise your hand in spaces, even if you're saying one thing, but then your voice is heard and you're creating an opportunity for women to know that they can speak.
The digital gender gap is twofold. On the one hand, women and girls are invisible in statistics, and on the other, the majority of development efforts do not adequately address women's needs. One example is the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. Out of 54 gender-specific indicators, only 12, or less than 25%, are produced with enough regularity, meaning that there is not enough data available to monitor progress accurately across all regions of the world. These numbers are far from ideal, which is why today we would like to explore the pitfalls of designing such projects and identify the gaps in data economy inclusion. We'll do that with the help of my two brilliant guests. First, Ayan, Farah, Awad. Ayan is Project Delivery Manager with the United Nations World Food Programme, with experience in the humanitarian field, spanning roles in the field engagement, strategy alignment, change management, and innovative programming. Hi, Ayan.
Hi, Martina. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And we're also joined by Mwara Gichanga. Mwara is a public interest, gender and technology activist with experience in research, capacity building, advocacy, network building, and stakeholder engagement. She is also project lead and coordinator at My Data Rights, an NGO that supports the Afro-feminist approach to data protection and usage. Hi, Mwara.
Hi, Martina. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you both for taking the time. Let's jump in. Mwara, in your work with gender and data justice, you regularly assess inclusion in data protection and privacy regulations in Africa. How do you define true gender inclusion in your field?
To me, true inclusion means examining power, considering all sorts of context, challenging that power, centering marginalized groups especially in this datafied society, and also ensuring that that power is shared.
And Ayan, what do you consider to be true digital inclusion? And how does your project with the UN work to foster this inclusion?
I think it's almost similar to what my colleague has just said, but I'm narrowing it down to the vulnerable communities. For us, what we look at is bridging digital divide. When you say we have equal access to technology in terms of infrastructure and also in terms of the device and the softwares, it's not a fair scale. There are those who are advantaged and there are those who are disadvantaged. And I think starting from there gives you leverage in terms of what do they have, what do they not have, and what can you bring on board to build their capacity in terms of having the right access and then including them in the discussion in terms of data.
I understand. So true inclusion isn't simply accounting for diversity in your data. It's actually bringing women into the field and upskilling them to work in the data economy themselves. On that note, do you see any discrepancies between the definitions that the projects have of inclusion and how women actually see themselves and their roles in the data economy?
I think for me, the gap really isn't in the definition of inclusion. It's where the women don't see themselves at all. For example, when it comes to policy making for digital connectivity and access, oftentimes women are not involved in those conversations. And even if they want to contribute and participate in them, they're not capacitated. They're not trained enough to contribute and participate in the discussion. It always feels like it's some sort of tick box. Like, oh, we had this number of women come in, give their feedback or include in this person, but it never feels like it's valid or valuable contribution and participation for women.
This is something we will look closely within our organization. So we have a 20 to 25% representation of women in technology within the organization. And one that has worked is more on allyship, like being intentional about it and looking closely around how to attract the right talent, how not only to attract, but also to maintain the talent. Because it's one way to bring the women in the workforce in the technological field and data field, but it's another to like maintain them throughout. Another element for me would be on the self-belief. I feel like women tend not to believe they can do it. It's said when a man looks at a CV, he can do 20% of it and will apply for that job and will get it and will learn on the job and continue. But that's different for women, even if they can do 80% of what that job entails. So how do you change that perspective in terms of women believing in themselves and ensuring that they're taking the next step of action?
So this idea of inclusion needing to be intersectional in its representation came up in our previous episode as well. Stacey said that we need to acknowledge the intersectionality of race and class and gender and how this shapes access to data economy in order to even begin having women see themselves represented. So I was wondering if you had something to add. What do you see as the main barriers standing in the way of women's inclusion in data economy?
So a lot of existing issues come from family structures, from political structures, from structures that exist for us to exercise our rights in. Sometimes it could be an issue of cultural and language barriers, for example. So this could lead to, misunderstanding and again, exclusion of these individuals. We see this a lot in women. For example, like recently there was a release by a working group in Kenya to build on an accessibility bill. And if you just see the list of people who are part of the working group, 2 are women, 6 are men. So like you can already see in terms of just tokenism itself, it's really just about taking the marks.
If we can design projects within a certain angle to try and tackle the issues and document them and improve them on a continuous basis, then we'll be solving the inclusive challenges that we have at the workplace and also within the communities that we serve. I would give a good example of when we're doing like projects for specifically pregnant and lactating mothers. In this narrowing of such projects, you're narrowing it down to women. But in the context of data, you can still do that in specific communities. The reason why I'm saying this is it's very tricky in any programming to separate the women unless your project from the initiative was targeting women. So ensuring that in everything that you're doing in your programming, you're able to narrow down to who you're trying to solve this problem for. So you're trying to empower, but how do we do it in a way that you're not changing the ecosystem that we operate in?
In your experience, Ayan and Mwara, is it difficult to access disaggregated data? And how can we promote the collection of that data in the future?
I think this is a yes and no answer at the same time. When you have intention and you have a structured approach from the beginning, then it becomes easy to collect disaggregated data because you're putting measures from the beginning to ensure that all ethical considerations are put in place, all privacy considerations are put in place, and you're communicating clearly to the people that you're serving. But if the intention is not there, then definitely that becomes a challenge. Another element in terms of picking out disaggregated data would be in terms of having governance, in terms of where you're hosting that data, who are you sharing with, do you have consent to it? And in situation whereby you're done with that programming, how do you ensure that that data leaves your database?
And Mwara, in your experience, how does a lack of disaggregated data affect your own work?
Actually, we previously conducted a research titled the Afrodata's Futures Project. And within that research, what was interesting to see is that this disaggregated data oftentimes is not available. And if it is available, it's oftentimes not used, especially when it comes to gender data. Within national databases of like 15 countries in the African continent, only 52% of those countries have available data that has gender-relevant indicators.
Looking specifically at the projects now, Are there any ways beyond inclusion and opportunity for marginalized groups and women where these design flaws might manifest themselves, Ayan?
What I see is the time it takes to be able to have the right information, the right data to make informed decision takes long, and it has a cost implication. So the minute the design is wrong, it means it's garbage in, garbage out. So you're collecting the wrong data, and you want this wrong data to be able to give you informed decision to change your processes. And sometimes it even takes long to even clean it.
Mwara, how do you see the design flaws manifesting, especially when it comes to fighting for representation and consideration of women when it comes to data protection policies?
I think Ayan captured this very perfectly. Design flaw is exclusion by design. However, maybe I can prompt a solution. Collaboration and co-creation is essential to ensure that we don't have these design flaws, just to ensure that there's inclusion and that women are participating in data economies. So working across sectors, working with local people, ensuring, especially with communities, not to come from a savior perspective, but co-create solutions with local partners to ensure that their needs are captured and there's ownership of the solutions by the local communities.
Thank you, Mwara. Now, what role does representation play? What kind of difference does it actually make when you have a woman behind the design process?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I'd say harness strength from both sides. So it's very interesting when a woman is in power and is in the designing phase, we'll only look at from the woman side of it. But I feel like women look at it from both sides to try and ensure that there's a balance and to try and harness strengths from both. Your end goal is to ensure that the women are empowered, but also you're not leaving the men out of it because they also play a very critical role in ensuring the success of the whole initiatives.
I completely understand what you're saying, Ayan, but I just think it's challenging for women to be in all spaces. We've always just trying to define those spaces, trying to pull our seats into those spaces because the door is not necessarily open for us. And so I think it's important that we occupy the spaces because not only are we able to ensure that our needs and unique experiences are captured, but we can tailor-make solutions that really address our specific needs and issues.
I find it really inspiring that you both mentioned how women are more than capable of being active participants in the field. They simply need to be encouraged. Your work creating opportunities for young women is truly admirable. What would be your recommendations for young women or girls that are considering working in the data field? Mwara?
Well, number one would be for young women to remember that it's the world we live in. We live in a very datafied society, and data is the biggest resource. And so participating through data-driven solutions or mechanisms is essential for any person. Take on those STEM projects. No matter if it feels like an engineering class has 2 girls, take on those courses, learn technical skills.
What I would also still tell my young self is you don't need necessarily to be very good also in math and physics. We have technologies like low code, no code. You can create application using very minimum coding. Within my team, I have women from different fields, meaning communication, psychology, education. So I have teachers within my team. And now they are part of the data economy, meaning that it's a journey. You don't necessarily need to be a guru or very technical in technology. The spectrum is big.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ayan. Lastly, could you tell us a bit more about your own journey and how you got involved in the data economy?
My initial interest was media and journalism. That's what I did in university. And I remember one of my first jobs after my internship was working with this woman who is leading a digital rights empowered organization in Kenya. I had no idea about digital rights, technological rights. I had no idea the interplay when it comes to gender. All I had was my background in media and journalism. And so, got into that space, got very interested in it. I love anything that is women related just because, number one, I'm a woman. And I also come from a family where we're mostly girls.
So after finishing my computer science degree, I was a bit afraid to venture into the technology world. And my fear was a result of, am I good enough? Can I do it? what is expected of me. So those were notions that were like piggy banking on my brain. I didn't necessarily go directly to the technology field, but I worked in the humanitarian spectrum, and I had mentors who would tell me like, I'm good, I can do it. And that's how I ended up now building my skills to be able to now getting a niche in what I'm good at and what I'm not. And through the mentorship that I got from like my previous leadership, it enabled me to identify myself.
Thank you, Ayan. Lastly, how can we foster the inclusion of women and girls in the data economy in the future?
I think it's important to address the stakeholder and government involvement. We need to ensure that legal and governance processes are put in place that enforce gender-inclusive policies. We need to ensure that we are continuously advocating for policies that promote gender inclusivity. To bring about real change, we need to ensure that governance is gendered in its approach and design.
Another element I would say is partnership and collaboration. You cannot do this alone. So for us within the organization, we look at institutions, so youth centers within the region. We look at government, so within the counties, what approaches are they doing in terms of empowering the youth from a digital side of it, and what can we tap on? So it's a throughout process, and you cannot do it alone. Bringing in women in this field is not only good enough, but how do we ensure at the end of the day we're able to retain them and we're putting them at leadership position?
Thank you both for your time and for your valuable insights. Thank you for your patience. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you and goodbye.
Women Leading Digital is brought to you by GIZ, the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, and is produced by Bear Radio. I am Martina Karaparusheva. Follow GIZ for more information, news and stories on digital transformation and gender at www.bmz-digital.global, and make sure to listen to other episodes of this series.